March 17th, 1943. Kummersdorf Proving Ground, 50 kilometers south of Berlin. The morning air hung heavy with the metallic scent of gun oil and cordite. Hauptmann Klaus Werner adjusted his shooting glasses and examined the weapon lying on the testing bench before him. An American M1 Garand rifle, serial number 1,400,206, captured 3 weeks earlier near Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. Werner had spent 15 years in Wehrmacht ordnance, evaluating captured weapons from Poland, France, the Soviet Union. He understood firearms the way a watchmaker understood gears and springs. His hands had broken down hundreds of rifles, measured tolerances, calculated rates of fire. But this weapon troubled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The rifle was beautiful in its simplicity, no unnecessary complexity, no artisan craftsmanship that couldn't be replicated in a factory, every part machined to tolerances that suggested mass production without sacrifice of quality. The Americans had built this rifle to be manufactured by the thousands, yet it performed like something hand-fitted by a master gunsmith. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Werner picked up his Karabiner 98K, the standard infantry rifle of the Wehrmacht, since June 19, 1935, a magnificent weapon, the culmination of Mauser's bolt-action development stretching back to 1898, accurate to 550 meters with iron sights, reliable in mud, snow, desert heat, the rifle that had conquered Poland in 35 days, France in 6 weeks, and carried German infantry to the gates of Moscow. He worked the bolt. Smooth action, lift the handle, pull back, push forward, rotate down, lock. A trained German soldier could fire 15 aimed rounds per minute. Werner himself, an expert marksman, could manage 18 rounds per minute in ideal conditions. This was considered excellent performance. German military doctrine emphasized aimed fire from prepared positions, every round carefully placed. The problem lay not with the Kar 98K's capabilities, but with what the American rifle sitting before him could do. Werner lifted the M1 Garand, 9.5 pounds, slightly heavier than his Kar 98K at 8.6 pounds. But that weight included the gas operating system, the self-loading mechanism, and an 8-round en-bloc clip. He inserted a clip into the rifle's action. The clip slid smoothly into the internal magazine with a satisfying click. No fumbling with individual rounds, no stripper clip that had to be carefully positioned. Just insert, and the rifle was loaded. 8 rounds of 30-06 Springfield ammunition, the same powerful cartridge the Americans had used since 1906. Werner raised the rifle to his shoulder, the peep sights aligned naturally. He took aim at the target 200 meters downrange, a standard Wehrmacht silhouette. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired. The recoil was modest, well controlled by the operating rod and gas system. But Werner didn't need to work a bolt. He simply pulled the trigger again, and again, and again. 8 rounds downrange in less than 6 seconds. He didn't need to break his sight picture, didn't need to lower the rifle to work the action, didn't need to manually chamber the next round. The rifle did everything automatically. When the 8th round fired, the empty clip ejected with a distinctive metallic ping, and the bolt locked open, ready to receive a fresh clip. Werner lowered the rifle and walked to the target. 8 holes, clustered in the chest and head area. Effective killing shots. All 8 rounds on target in the time it would have taken him to fire 3 rounds from his Kar 98K. The mathematics were undeniable. In any engagement lasting 1 minute, a German soldier with a Kar 98K might fire 15 to 18 aimed rounds. An American soldier with an M1 Garand could fire 60 rounds in the same period, each one accurately placed without interruption. This wasn't just a technical advantage, it was a tactical revolution. German infantry doctrine assumed rough parity in individual rifle firepower. Machine guns provided suppressive fire. Riflemen engaged specific targets. The Americans had given every infantryman the firepower of multiple riflemen. They had changed the fundamental arithmetic of infantry combat. Werner returned to the testing bench and began field stripping the M1. The rifle disassembled without tools in less than 2 minutes. Operating rod, bolt, gas cylinder, simple components that a conscript could maintain in field conditions. He examined each part under magnification. The machining quality was extraordinary. Tolerances held to fractions of a millimeter. Surface finish consistent across all components. This rifle had been manufactured at scale, yet maintained quality standards that German factories struggled to achieve, even with limited production runs. The gas operating system fascinated him. When a round fired, propellant gases were diverted through a port in the barrel. These gases drove a piston connected to an operating rod. The rod cycled the action, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a new round. The entire sequence took a fraction of a second. The rifle's sights remained aligned throughout. There was no loss of accuracy despite the rapid-fire capability. Werner had reviewed captured intelligence reports from North Africa. American forces landing at Operation Torch in November 1942 carried these rifles as standard equipment. Not experimental weapons issued to elite units, not specialized firearms for particular roles. Every American infantryman carried an M1 Garand. The entire United States Army had been equipped with semi-automatic rifles before entering the war. German intelligence had initially dismissed these reports. The analysts in Berlin claimed American industrial capacity couldn't possibly support such production. Semi-automatic rifles were complex weapons requiring skilled craftsmen. Germany's own attempts at semi-automatic infantry rifles had failed repeatedly. The Gewehr 41, introduced in 1941, proved unreliable and expensive to manufacture. The Walther and Mauser versions both suffered from complex gas trap systems that fouled easily, but the evidence before Werner told a different story. The Americans hadn't just designed a semi-automatic rifle. They had designed a semi-automatic rifle optimized for mass production by semi-skilled workers. Every component showed evidence of manufacturing techniques that prioritized efficiency without compromising performance. This wasn't craftsmanship. This was industrial engineering at the highest level. Werner picked up a folder containing translated American documents captured in Tunisia, production records from Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. By January 1941, the armory was producing 600 M1 Garands per day. By January 1944, production reached nearly 4,000 rifles per day. The United States was manufacturing more M1 Garands in a single day than Germany had produced Gewehr 41s in the entire war. The implications troubled him deeply. Werner understood weapons. He understood that superior equipment in the hands of trained soldiers produced superior results. German infantry training, tactical doctrine, and individual soldier quality remained excellent. But excellence with inferior weapons produced inferior outcomes. An American soldier with an M1 Garand possessed firepower equivalent to 3 German soldiers with Kar 98K rifles. In squad-level engagements, this disparity became overwhelming. Reports from Tunisia supported this conclusion. German units engaging American forces consistently reported being pinned down by rifle fire, not machine gun fire, which they expected and knew how to handle. Rifle fire. Continuous, sustained rifle fire from every American position. German soldiers would rise to shoot, acquire targets, fire, work the bolt, and find themselves unable to return effective fire because incoming rounds were too numerous. Werner walked to the firing line again. He loaded another N-block clip into the M1 Garand. This time he would test rapid fire at moving targets. The targets appeared at staggered intervals. 100 meters, 150 meters, 200 meters. Werner engaged each target as it appeared. 8 rounds, 6 hits, 75% hit rate while firing rapidly at moving targets. With his Kar 98K, he might have managed 3 shots in the same time period, possibly 2 hits. The American rifle wasn't more accurate than the Kar 98K in absolute terms. Both rifles could maintain 4-minute of angle groups under ideal conditions, but the M1's semi-automatic action meant accuracy didn't suffer during rapid fire. The shooter maintained his sight picture, his stance, his breathing. There was no interruption to work the bolt. No need to reacquire the target after each shot. Werner set the rifle down and lit a cigarette. His hands were steady, but his mind worked through uncomfortable calculations. He had been ordered to evaluate the captured American rifle and provide recommendations. The evaluation was straightforward. The M1 Garand was superior to the Kar 98K in every tactical measure that mattered in combat. Rate of fire, reload speed, sustained fire capability, ease of maintenance. The only advantages the German rifle retained were slightly lower weight and the ability to reload individual rounds without emptying the magazine. The recommendations were more complex. Germany needed a semi-automatic infantry rifle. This conclusion was obvious to anyone who understood infantry combat. But producing such a rifle in the quantities needed was another matter entirely. The Gewehr 43, Germany's improved semi-automatic rifle entering production in October 1943, showed promise. It utilized a simpler gas port system copied from captured Soviet SVT-40 rifles, but even optimistic projections suggested maximum production of perhaps 100,000 rifles annually. The Wehrmacht fielded millions of infantrymen. Equipping even a fraction of them would take years. Meanwhile, the Americans were producing M1 Garands by the thousands daily. Werner had reviewed the intelligence estimates. By mid-1943, approximately 2 million M1 Garands had been manufactured. By D-Day in June 1944, over 3 million would be in service. The United States Army would enter the invasion of Europe with virtually every infantryman carrying a semi-automatic rifle. The strategic implications extended beyond individual firefights. American commanders could plan operations knowing their infantry possessed inherent firepower advantages. They could advance aggressively, knowing their soldiers could deliver continuous fire while moving. They could hold positions with fewer troops, knowing each soldier's firepower exceeded German equivalents. German commanders faced the opposite reality. They had to account for being outgunned at the most fundamental level. Standard German infantry tactics assumed rough parity in rifle firepower. Those assumptions no longer held. Every engagement with American forces meant fighting with a firepower deficit that couldn't be overcome through superior tactics alone. Werner stubbed out his cigarette and began writing his report. The testing had taken 3 days. He had fired over 400 rounds through the captured M1 Garand. The rifle functioned flawlessly. No malfunctions, no feeding issues, no failures of the gas system. He had exposed it to sand, mud, and freezing temperatures. It continued to operate reliably. He had field stripped and reassembled it multiple times. The process was simple, enough that any soldier could maintain the weapon in combat conditions. His report would be factual, precise, and professionally written. It would note the M1 Garand's technical specifications, its operational characteristics, and its performance under testing. It would compare the American rifle favorably against the Kar 98K in every relevant metric. It would recommend immediate acceleration of German semi-automatic rifle development and production. Werner knew his report would join hundreds of others in Wehrmacht ordnance files. He knew the recommendations would be noted, discussed, and ultimately set aside due to resource constraints and production limitations. Germany lacked the industrial capacity to replicate American achievements. The war had spread German manufacturing across too many projects: tanks, aircraft, artillery, submarines. Infantry rifles received lower priority. The tragedy was that Germany had recognized the need for semi-automatic rifles before the war. Development programs dated back to the mid-1930s, but those programs had been hampered by overly strict specifications, inadequate funding, and bureaucratic delays. The German military establishment had assumed their traditional advantages in training and doctrine would suffice against opponents armed with similar weapons. They hadn't anticipated facing an enemy whose every infantryman carried superior firepower. Werner completed his report as the sun set over Kummersdorf. The M1 Garand sat on the testing bench, cleaned and ready for further evaluation. Tomorrow, other ordnance officers would test the rifle. They would reach the same conclusions Werner had reached. The American rifle was superior. Germany needed to respond. But the response would come too late and in insufficient numbers to matter. The mathematics remained constant. In the time required for a German soldier to fire 3 carefully aimed shots from his Kar 98K, an American soldier with his M1 Garand could fire 8. When both soldiers were equally trained and skilled, the American would hit 2 to 3 times as many targets. Multiply this across entire divisions, across multiple armies, across hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and the advantage became insurmountable. Werner locked the M1 Garand in the armory and walked to his quarters. The March evening was cold, but he barely noticed. His mind remained fixed on the weapon he had tested. The Americans had achieved something remarkable. They had designed, manufactured, and fielded a semi-automatic infantry rifle as standard equipment before entering the war. They had given their soldiers a technological advantage that would prove decisive in countless engagements. They had understood that modern warfare required not just brave soldiers and sound tactics, but superior equipment produced at industrial scale. The reality of what Werner had documented would manifest on battlefields across Europe and North Africa throughout 1943 and 1944. German soldiers who had never seen an M1 Garand in testing facilities would encounter them in combat, where the firepower disparity became brutally clear. June 6, 1944. Omaha Beach, Normandy. The 352nd Infantry Division defended the bluffs overlooking the beach. A full-strength German division of 12,000 men occupied fortified positions with excellent fields of fire, reinforced concrete emplacements, interlocking machine gun positions. German officers had planned the defense meticulously, every meter of beach covered by concentrated fire. When American infantry reached the base of the bluffs, they began returning fire, not the scattered shots of pinned-down troops, but overwhelming volumes of rifle fire. Every American rifleman carried an M1 Garand. Every rifleman could fire 8 rounds as quickly as he could pull the trigger. German defenders found themselves unable to maintain aimed fire. The incoming rounds were too numerous. Machine gun crews were targeted by dozens of rifles simultaneously. Obergefreiter Hans Richter crouched behind a concrete wall, his Kar 98K gripped tightly. He had been told the Americans would be demoralized after the slaughter on the beach, easy targets. But the fire coming from below was continuous. He rose to shoot, acquired a target, fired, and immediately incoming rounds forced him back into cover. He had managed 1 shot. Before he could work the bolt and fire again, a dozen American rounds impacted around his position. His squad leader, Unteroffizier Kurt Braun, shouted orders to maintain fire discipline, but discipline meant nothing when you couldn't raise your head without attracting overwhelming return fire. The Americans weren't using their rifles like rifles. They were using them like automatic weapons. Each position down on the beach seemed to have its own machine gun. Except they weren't machine guns. They were rifles, semi-automatic rifles that every American soldier carried. The German doctrine assumed suppressive fire would come from machine guns. Riflemen engaged individual targets with careful aimed shots. This doctrine worked when facing opponents with similar weapons. The British with their Lee-Enfield bolt actions, the Soviets with their Mosin Nagants, even the Soviet SVT-40 semi-automatic rifle had proven unreliable enough that most Red Army soldiers still carried bolt actions. But the Americans had changed the equation. Their entire infantry force carried semi-automatic rifles, reliable semi-automatic rifles that functioned in sand, mud, and salt spray. The volume of fire they could generate exceeded German planning estimates by factors of 3 or 4. By mid-afternoon on June 6th, American forces had fought their way off Omaha Beach. The 352nd Infantry Division, which should have held the position indefinitely, had been overwhelmed by firepower. Not artillery, not naval gunfire, not airstrikes. Rifle fire. Individual American infantrymen with their M1 Garands had generated sufficient fire to suppress German defensive positions and enable the advance. The hedgerow fighting in Normandy during June and July 1944 provided German infantry extensive exposure to American firepower. The bocage terrain consisted of small fields bordered by thick hedgerows. Each field became a natural defensive position. Engagement ranges rarely exceeded 100 meters. Traditional German marksmanship doctrine, emphasizing long-range precision, became irrelevant. What mattered was volume of accurate fire delivered quickly. A German squad defending a hedgerow position would hear the distinctive crack of M1 Garands opening fire, not 1 or 2 rifles, but 8 or 10 rifles, all firing rapidly. German soldiers attempting to return fire found themselves pinned down by incoming rounds. They would fire once, twice from their Kar 98K rifles, working the bolt between shots, and before they could fire a third time, multiple American riflemen had already emptied their 8-round clips. Feldwebel Ernst Müller commanded a rifle squad in the 2nd Parachute Division, a veteran of Crete and the Eastern Front. Experienced, skilled, well-trained. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. His squad had held defensive positions against Soviet attacks where Red Army soldiers outnumbered them 5-1. But fighting Americans proved different. Müller's squad occupied a hedgerow position near Saint-Lô on July 12, 1944. His MG-42 machine gun covered the approach. His 8 riflemen had excellent fields of fire. When Americans attacked across the open field, Müller's machine gunner opened fire. Effective suppression. The Americans went to ground, finding cover. Standard tactical response. Then the American rifle fire began. Müller counted at least 12 rifles firing semi-automatically. The volume was extraordinary. His machine gunner couldn't maintain continuous fire because incoming rounds kicked up dirt around his position. His riflemen couldn't acquire targets because every time they exposed themselves, multiple American rifles engaged them. Müller had faced Soviet infantry armed with PPS submachine guns at close range. This felt similar, except the Americans were hitting targets at 100 meters with rifle accuracy. Müller's squad held their position for 40 minutes before withdrawing. They hadn't been overrun. They hadn't panicked. They had simply been unable to return effective fire against overwhelming American firepower. This scenario repeated across Normandy hundreds of times daily. German units holding superior positions found themselves unable to win firefights against American infantry. Wehrmacht after-action reports from Normandy consistently noted the American firepower advantage. A captured German training document from July 1944 acknowledged the problem directly. Enemy rifle squads generate fire, equivalent to our machine gun positions. Conventional suppression tactics ineffective against semi-automatic rifle-equipped units. Recommend increased machine gun allocation to compensate. But increasing machine gun allocation didn't solve the fundamental problem. Machine guns required crews, ammunition bearers, and were vulnerable to concentrated fire. The M1 Garand distributed firepower across entire squads. Suppressing an American squad required suppressing 8 or 9 individually armed soldiers, each capable of delivering devastating fire. The German answer, the Sturmgewehr 44, arrived too late and in too few numbers. Approximately 426,000 were produced, mostly in 1944 and 45. A revolutionary weapon firing an intermediate cartridge from a 30-round magazine in either semi-automatic or fully automatic mode. German soldiers who received the St. G44 found it effective, but for every St. G44 produced, 10 Kar 98K rifles were manufactured. The vast majority of German infantry continued carrying bolt-action rifles until the war's end. The German Gewehr 43 semi-automatic rifle, entering production in October 1943, represented another attempted solution. It incorporated a simplified gas port system and detachable 10-round magazine. Production totaled approximately 403,000 rifles by war's end. But this compared to over 5 million M1 Garands produced by the United States. For every 100 German soldiers, perhaps 1 or 2 carried semi-automatic rifles. For every 100 American soldiers, 98 carried M1 Garands. December 16, 1944. The Battle of the Bulge began, Germany's largest offensive since 1940. 200,000 Wehrmacht soldiers attacked through the Ardennes, hoping to split Allied forces and recapture Antwerp. German commanders believed they understood American capabilities. American forces relied on material superiority. In close combat, German tactical excellence would prevail. The reality proved different. At Elsenborn Ridge, the 99th Infantry Division faced German forces, outnumbering them 3-1. American infantry held their positions through volume of rifle fire. Official U.S. Army combat interviews conducted immediately after the battle recorded the experience. One infantry sergeant reported the defense. "We just kept firing. 8 rounds, reload, 8 more rounds. The Germans couldn't advance through that wall of lead." German casualties in the first week of the offensive exceeded planning estimates. A captured operations order from the 12th SS Panzer Division noted the problem. American small arms fire prevents movement, even with numerical superiority. Each enemy position must be treated as automatic weapon emplacement. German soldiers had been trained to expect machine gun fire from fortified positions. They knew how to assault machine guns, suppressive fire, maneuver, grenades. But American rifle fire didn't come from fixed positions requiring crew-served weapons. It came from individual soldiers spread across defensive lines. Each American rifleman possessed firepower equivalent to multiple German riflemen. Assaulting American positions required overwhelming the defenders through artillery, armor support, or accepting casualties that German forces in December 1944 could not sustain. The cold weather of the Ardennes should have favored German forces. Winter warfare required soldiers to operate weapons while wearing heavy gloves, in sub-zero temperatures, with oil thickening in rifle actions. Bolt-action rifles became difficult to operate. Frozen fingers struggled with bolt manipulation. The M1 Garand required only trigger pulls. The semi-automatic action cycled reliably despite the cold. The on-block clip could be loaded quickly with numb fingers while German soldiers fumbled with individual rounds. U.S. Army medical records from the Battle of the Bulge noted significantly lower frostbite casualties among American riflemen compared to German forces. The difference was attributed partly to less exposure during reloading and firing sequences. A German soldier had to work the bolt while exposed. An American soldier could remain in cover while firing repeatedly. By January 1945, the German offensive had stalled. American forces counterattacked in bitter cold. Winter conditions that should have made the M1 Garand less reliable instead demonstrated another advantage. The rifle continued functioning when other weapons failed. Field reports consistently praised the M1's reliability in extreme conditions. The Rhine crossings in March 1945 demonstrated the complete tactical transformation the M1 Garand enabled. German defenders faced impossible mathematics. Traditional military doctrine since Napoleon assumed one defender could engage 3 attackers from prepared positions. This calculation presumed equal rates of fire. With M1 Garands, American attackers generated 3 times the fire rate of German defenders. The traditional defensive advantage collapsed. Wehrmacht planning documents captured after the Rhine crossings revealed German awareness of the problem. American infantry firepower superiority renders standard defensive calculations obsolete. Required force ratios no longer valid when enemy possesses 3-1 firepower advantage at individual soldier level. These weren't excuses from defeated commanders. They were honest assessments from professional military officers who understood their tactical situation. The human cost of the firepower imbalance appeared in casualty statistics. While many factors affected casualty rates, including artillery, air power, and logistics, studies of small unit actions consistently showed American infantry inflicting disproportionate casualties in firefights. The rifle each soldier carried made measurable difference. German casualties from rifle fire were substantial throughout the European campaign. May 8, 1945. Germany surrendered. The war in Europe ended. Wehrmacht arsenals contained millions of Kar-98K rifles. Excellent weapons. Accurate, reliable, well-manufactured, but decisively inferior to the weapons carried by their opponents. German soldiers, brave and well-trained as they were, had fought with equipment that put them at disadvantage in the most fundamental infantry task: shooting the enemy before the enemy shoots you. The story of the M1 Garand's impact on German forces wasn't simply about technical specifications. It represented a broader truth about modern warfare. Industrial capacity mattered more than military tradition. Mass production of superior equipment defeated smaller quantities of adequate equipment. Democratic societies could organize, produce, and fight more effectively than totalitarian states when they mobilized their resources. John Cantius Garand, born January 1, 1888 in Saint-Rémy, Quebec, Canada, had created more than a rifle. He had created the weapon that enabled American infantry to fight and win against veteran opponents. Born Jean Cantius Garand, he moved to the United States with his family in 1899. He began working at Springfield Armory on November 4, 1919. He devoted nearly 2 decades to perfecting his semi-automatic rifle design. Garand's early prototypes used different operating systems and calibers. The U.S. Army originally favored a .276 caliber cartridge, offering better ballistics than .30-06, but General Douglas MacArthur, then Army Chief of Staff, insisted on retaining .30-06 in 1932 to utilize existing ammunition stocks and maintain compatibility with machine guns. This decision delayed adoption but ultimately proved sound. The M1 Garand underwent extensive testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground and Springfield Armory through the early 1930s. Problems were identified and corrected. The gas system was simplified from an early gas trap design to a more reliable gas port system. The trigger mechanism was refined. The stock design improved for better ergonomics. On January 9, 1936, the rifle was officially adopted as the U.S. rifle caliber .30 M1. Initial production was slow. Only a few thousand rifles were manufactured in 1937 and 38. Production accelerated as war loomed, reaching 600 rifles per day by January 1941. By the time the United States entered the war in December 1941, the Army was fully equipped with M1 Garands. This represented extraordinary foresight. America equipped its military with semi-automatic rifles before engaging in combat. The manufacturing achievement matched the design achievement. Springfield Armory in Massachusetts transformed from a modest government arsenal to a massive production facility. By 1943, Springfield could produce over 4,000 M1 Garands daily. The workforce transformation was remarkable. By June 1943, women comprised 43% of Springfield Armory workers. These workers, many with no prior manufacturing experience, produced weapons that exceeded German quality standards. Winchester Repeating Arms Company manufactured 513,880 M1 Garands during the war. International Harvester, traditionally a manufacturer of farming equipment, produced 337,623 rifles. Harrington and Richardson added 428,600 rifles during and immediately after the war. Total production exceeded 5.4 million rifles. This distributed production meant no single point of failure. Bombing one factory wouldn't halt American rifle production. Germany's centralized manufacturing made them vulnerable to disruption. Allied bombing raids repeatedly damaged German industrial capacity. American factories, protected by oceans and distance, produced continuously throughout the war. The cost efficiency told its own story. An M1 Garand cost the U.S. government $83 in 1940. By 1945, improved manufacturing techniques reduced costs to $31 per rifle. The German Gewehr 43 cost approximately 350 Reichsmarks, nearly 4 times as much when adjusted for purchasing power. Yet the M1 proved more reliable and easier to maintain. German military theorists, studying their defeats in the post-war period, consistently identified the firepower disparity as critical. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, who commanded German forces in Italy, wrote in his memoirs that the American infantryman, armed with his semi-automatic rifle, possessed a firepower advantage that we could never overcome. Our tactical superiority meant nothing when each enemy soldier could fire 8 rounds to our 1. General Hasso von Manteuffel, who commanded during the Battle of the Bulge, testified during his interrogation that the American semi-automatic rifle gave their infantry a decisive advantage. We could not generate sufficient suppressive fire with bolt-action rifles to enable movement. Even when we held superior positions, American rifle fire pinned our troops down. The M1 Garand's influence extended beyond World War II. The rifle served American forces through the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. When Communist forces launched human wave attacks, M1-equipped UN forces generated sufficient firepower to break up assaults that would have overwhelmed bolt-action-equipped units. The extreme cold of Korean winters tested the M1 to its limits. American troops reported that of all their weapons, the M1 remained the most reliable in sub-zero temperatures. The rifle wasn't officially replaced as standard service until the M14 was adopted in 1957, with first deliveries beginning July 1959. Full transition across all units took until 1961. Even then, M1 Garands remained in use with Reserve and National Guard units into the 1970s. The M1 had served American forces for over 2 decades, equipping soldiers in 3 major conflicts. The M1 Garand's legacy shaped all subsequent infantry rifle development. The principle it demonstrated, that infantry benefit from self-loading rifles, increasing their rate of fire without sacrificing accuracy, became foundational to post-war weapons development. Every modern infantry rifle from the AK-47 to the M16 to current assault rifles owes conceptual debt to the M1 Garand. It proved that semi-automatic operation wasn't just feasible for military rifles, but essential. When West Germany rebuilt its military as the Bundeswehr in the 1950s, they immediately adopted semi-automatic rifles. The bitter lesson of 1944 and 45 had been learned. No modern military would ever again equip infantry primarily with bolt-action rifles. The M1 Garand had demonstrated that doing so meant accepting decisive tactical disadvantage. The psychological impact on German soldiers who faced M1 Garands manifested in profound ways. The weapon represented technological superiority that contradicted everything they had been taught about American capabilities. German soldiers had been conditioned by propaganda to believe in Germanic technological and tactical superiority. When individual German infantrymen, properly equipped and well-trained, found themselves unable to win firefights against individual American infantrymen, the myth of superiority collapsed. After World War II, detailed studies of small unit actions consistently showed American infantry inflicting disproportionate casualties in firefights. While many factors contributed, including artillery, air superiority, and logistics, the consistent advantage in infantry firefights pointed clearly to the M1 Garand's role. American infantrymen could expect to win engagements even when outnumbered, provided they had reasonable cover and adequate ammunition. The story returned to Kummersdorf Proving Ground in the years after the war. The testing facilities that Hauptmann Werner had used stood empty. Germany's defeat was complete. The Wehrmacht that had conquered most of Europe in 1940 lay destroyed. Among the many factors that contributed to that defeat, the M1 Garand represented a clear and measurable advantage that German forces could not overcome. Werner's report, filed in March 1943, had been accurate in every detail. The American rifle was superior. Germany needed to respond. But the response came too late. The Gewehr 43 entered production in October 1943, 20 months after Werner's evaluation. Even then, production remained limited. German industry, strained by competing demands and Allied bombing, could not match American output. The fundamental lesson was harsh but clear. Excellence in training and tactics could not compensate for inferior equipment. German infantry were among the best-trained soldiers in the world. Their tactical doctrine was sophisticated and well-developed. Their individual soldier quality was high. But when equipped with bolt-action rifles and facing opponents with semi-automatic rifles, they lost firefights. The mathematics were inescapable. American industrial foresight had equipped every infantryman with superior firepower before the war began. This advantage multiplied across millions of soldiers and thousands of engagements. It saved American lives. It enabled faster advances. It allowed American forces to hold positions with fewer troops. It gave American commanders tactical flexibility that German commanders lacked. General George S. Patton's assessment, written in his January 26, 1945 letter to the Chief of Ordnance, proved prophetic. In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised. Patton understood that wars were won not by individual heroism, but by superior firepower delivered by ordinary soldiers. His Third Army's rapid advances were possible because infantry units generated overwhelming firepower without waiting for machine gun support. The production numbers told the complete story. M1 Garand production verified from official records. Springfield Armory, 4,188,669 rifles. Winchester, 513,880 rifles. International Harvester, 337,623 rifles. Harrington and Richardson, 428,600 rifles. Total, 5,468,772 rifles. German. Semi-automatic rifle production verified. Gewehr 43 all variants, approximately 403,000 rifles. Sturmgewehr 44, approximately 426,000 rifles. Total German semi-automatic rifle production, approximately 830,000 rifles. The ratio was greater than 6-1 in America's favor. But the practical ratio was far worse, because German semi-automatic rifles were issued to specialists and snipers, not standard infantry. American M1 Garands equipped every rifleman. The economic dimension proved equally decisive. American factories produced M1 Garands, using specialized machinery requiring massive initial investment, but dramatically reducing per-unit costs. German factories, repeatedly bombed and relocated, never achieved comparable economies of scale. The cost per rifle reflected this reality. $31 American versus 350 Reichsmarks German. Superior weapons at lower cost produced in greater quantities. This was industrial warfare at its most fundamental level. The legacy extended far beyond battlefield victories. The M1 Garand demonstrated that democratic societies could organize production more efficiently than totalitarian regimes. Free workers in a democracy outproduced slave labor and coerced workers in a dictatorship. The rifle stood as physical evidence that American values translated into practical military advantage. For German soldiers who survived the war, the M1 Garand remained an unforgettable symbol, the weapon that turned citizen soldiers into superior warriors through mechanical advantage. The rifle that proved technology and production, not ideology and tradition, would determine the future of warfare. The greatest battle implement ever devised had earned its title through proven superiority on every battlefield where it served. The M1 Garand story illuminated a broader truth about the Second World War. Germany entered the conflict with tactical excellence, veteran troops, and sophisticated doctrine. But they faced opponents who understood that modern industrial warfare required equipping every soldier with the best available technology. The Americans didn't just design a superior rifle. They designed a rifle optimized for mass production, then produced it in quantities that overwhelmed German industrial capacity. When German ordnance officers like Hauptmann Werner tested captured M1 Garands, they recognized immediately what they faced: a weapon that represented not just superior engineering, but superior industrial philosophy. A rifle that embodied American understanding that wars were won by providing ordinary soldiers with extraordinary equipment. The testing at Kummersdorf in March 1943 revealed a truth that German military leadership could not address. They lacked the industrial capacity to respond. The final irony was that Germany had the knowledge and capability to develop effective semi-automatic rifles. Their engineers understood the principles. Their ordnance officers recognized the need, but they lacked the time, resources, and industrial organization to produce such weapons at the scale required. Meanwhile, American factories turned out M1 Garands by the thousands daily, equipping an entire military force with weapons that gave each soldier decisive firepower advantage. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.